For a number of years, people have asked me to talk about creating clinical applications by using point names. This is what this course is attempting to do. The purpose is to look at the meridian system with fresh eyes and to find ways to generate clinical ideas using the map the ancients have left us. We will be looking at what this map we call the meridians might be pointing at. And I'm hoping that besides offering you my understanding, you will also find ways to create your own. Before we start to look at the actual technical material involved, it is important that I state very clearly that I am not a sinologist and that my engagement with the classics is relatively limited. I'm not an authority on what the Han ancestors might have meant. I simply do not have the language or cultural roots to assess that. But in a way, that is actually an advantage in terms of the purpose of this class, because most of us practitioners are not at all that well versed in the language or culture of China of 2,000 years ago. So my understanding reflects my own era and might actually be more in tune with how you might perceive the meridians and their relationships to health issues. I do not believe that there is one unifying Chinese medicine, but rather that there are many. Even in the classics, like in the Neijing, the naming of points, the description of the meridians were compilations that many people contributed to. We know that because we see different descriptions of the channels. For example, Chapter 2 of the Lingshu describes all the meridians as going from the extremities towards the center. So the lung is issued at Shaoshang, lung 11, Fei Chu Yu Shaoshang, and then it flows to the fish border, lung 10, Liu Yu Yu Ji, etc. So all the meridians are set to Chu at the Jingwell point. Chu is to produce, to come out. It is where the sprouting is, and all the meridians are sprouted at the Jingwell points at the extremities and move towards the torso. That is one view of the Lingshu. And the order of the description is also not the order that we are familiar with nowadays, but starts at the lung, proceeds to the heart, actually the pericardium, then to the liver, the spleen, and the kidneys, then to the leg yang, the bladder, the gallbladder, and the stomach, and then to the arm yang, the sanjiao, the small intestine, and the last one is the large intestine. Some will argue that these are descriptions of the organ's 5 shu points and are unrelated to the channels. And that is a reasonable suggestion, since the channels are named as organs without their arm yin-yang or their leg yin-yang classifications. However, it still offers us another view of the channels than we assume to be the way nowadays. In fact, Lingshu 5 also shows us the same trajectory, but now the clock, the order of the channel, starts with the leg yang all moving upwards, then the arm yang all moving upwards also. The arm yin channels are not discussed, and yet Chibo asserts that he has talked about the 12 channels. Later on, in Chapter 10, the Lingshu describes the pathways of the meridians as we now know them, which means the lung begins in the middle jiao, moves out towards the thumb. And then the large intestine is described, and the rest of the meridian clock, including the heart, Shaoyin, this time channel, as an independent channel, is distinct from the pericardium. So this is pretty much what we concede to as being the meridian system nowadays. So we see that in each chapter, and even within one chapter, the channels can be described differently. Not one unifying theory, but a diversity of views, presumably depending on the point that the author is trying to make, supposedly in Chibo's name. We also know that many points have more than one name. For example, Mingmen in the Lingshu always refers to bladder 1, never to Du 4, and it claims explicitly that Mingmen is at the eye. This is in Chapter 5 of the Lingshu, and then again in Chapter 52. Heart 7, which we call Shenmen, is referred to as Guigyu, the sharp bone in the Lingshu. Ellis gives only the right side of that character, which is Dui, to cash or to exchange, in Grasping the Wind, in the alternative names for Heart 7. And Heart 5 is named Tongli, which now is written as Li Mile, but in Lingshu 10 it is Tongli, as in penetrating the inside. It is a different Li, meaning inside, not a mile. How, when, or why penetrating the inside has transformed into the penetrating mile is not clear to me. The list goes on, and there are many ways to name a point, and one will tend to choose to call a point by the name that most resonates with one's own understanding and purpose of the point. And yet, there is some general consensus as to what the standard point names are. I follow that standard, which seems to have come together and agreed upon for centuries. But we need to be aware that there are many interpretations and that there is no one system. That gives us the freedom to create our own understanding. Some interpretations have won popular acceptance, while others did not. But that does not mean always that it is because it was the best way to look at things. When many people are involved in a project, there will be politics and hierarchies, power games, etc. And we cannot tell if some big wig did not decide to hand down to us an interpretation that had absolutely no clinical value, and perhaps was really a reference to his or her favorite daughter and had nothing to do with medicine. We just don't know that. The way I'm looking at the points will be by channel as opposed to by region, although it is quite tradition to describe all the points of, say, the hand or the arm, and then move on to the upper arm, then to the shoulder, etc. But I am following the standard way in which most of us, at least in the West, study the points, which is sequentially by channel. I believe it is also good to remember that the Meridian system was compiled not just by medical people, but also by those practicing martial arts, meditators, geomancy type people, feng shui types, and other kinds of people, not just acupuncturists. It is even likely that we have been a minority contribution to the system, and have actually borrowed the system and applied needles therapeutically to a system that may have been designed for other purposes altogether. Our challenge is to constantly evaluate and find ways to make clinical application, and this is what this is all about. The meridians are called Jingmai. The character Jing is composed of silk on the left and rivers underground on the right. The character Mai is the joining of rivers. The part on the right means the flesh, meaning inside the body. Sorry, that's the part on the left, is the part that's in the body. Jing means a sutra, a classic, literally the sutures that hold things together. Mai means pulsations. The channels are the network of threads that hold who we are, define who we are, and provide the pulsations of the body. The reference to rivers and water pathways also suggests that the meridians describe life, which, like water, continues to change form from ice to liquid to vapor, change speed, direction, volume, and flows into the ocean, becoming a cloud, rain, stream, etc., coming back to the ocean, etc., etc., etc. Because of that constant movement, that is why we can affect change, and this is what we do with needles. Because they are Jing, sutras, they are supposed to point to the essence of what it means to be human, just as any sutra would be pointing to the essence of the teachings. Because of that, we are bound to have many views or interpretations of the channel system, because there are many views of what it means to be human. the Jingmai can be seen as metaphors for our spiritual life, representatives of biochemical processes of life, describing our growth along the trajectory of our lives, describing our interactions with the world, etc., etc., etc. Just as one might ask whether the sutras are the Dharma, or whether they contain the Dharma and point to it, one might ask the same of the channel system. In other words, do we get lost in the sutras as the actual thing, or are the sutras just pointing at something else? It is an essential aspect of the human entity, but is it our actual existence? In allowing for the channels to be references to, tools of human existence, rather than the actual entirety of it, we allow freedom to explore more than the meridians, and allow ourselves to use the channel system and still be able to explore more than just what has already been solidified as the channels. This sounds like a little bit of petty semantics, but it does have implications. For example, there are those who view the channel system as describing a path to, let's say, enlightenment. They might use the channel as a method of meditation and keep working to open the channels or to align themselves with a larger mirror, a larger macrocosm. There is no question that opening the channels allows for the mind to open. At least that is my experience. But I do not think that we can say that if the channels are open, the mind automatically gets enlightened, or that enlightenment is dependent or synonymous with free-flowing channels, because it is entirely possible to evolve spiritually and still have great deformations and obstructions in the physical body. So the expression of the meridians is not as full, open, or flowing, and yet the mind can be open. And I'm not sure that having an open, free-flowing, aligned channel system is any kind of guarantee for enlightenment either, but it does support it. The same is true with physical health. People can enjoy very good health, and still we may find that their channels are actually obstructed or unaligned or whatever. In fact, we tend to say that every individual has some tendency toward imbalances, and those are particular to their nature. Those imbalances can manifest as disease, but they may well not. It is true that people can be quite ill, and yet we might not find that their channel system is unaligned or obstructed, or there's anything wrong in the meridians. We would then tend to blame our skill in assessing the channels. But nonetheless, the channels, as they revealed themselves to us, did not point us to the reason of the disease. So aside from disliking the idea of our limitations, if we wish to help the patient, it makes sense to accept that the use of the channel system, as we understand it on them, is not the only key to their health and is limiting us. And then we are able to move to other modalities, other ways of thinking that might help the patient. I know that this is controversial and that we tend to really like the channels as representatives of life in its entirety. We would often then interpret a modality that helped in a way that would resonate with some channel understanding. But the point is that we have been unable to affect the problem through our regular tools of affecting the channels. And since in medicine we always find challenging cases that do not conform to the standard dogma, our ability to release dogmas and think outside the box, or utilize more boxes, can be very practical. There is always the question as to whether the meridians are the real physical entities, or whether they are metaphors for life and its processes. I believe that the answer is that they are actually both. There are clear physical activities associated with needling, including blood, lymph, and nerve flow. There are also clearly metaphors that are painted by the meridians that are pointing us towards a more fulfilled life. Much of Jeffrey Yuen's teaching is about that aspect, and there are other schools that do that. while we can describe the meridians as trajectories of the human condition and mediators of yin-yang, heaven and earth, and interpret these according to various worldviews, there is also a very clear physical component that is independent of that. The fact that acupuncture is used in animals, utilizing the same ideas and principles as in humans, suggests that even though yin-yang now have a different trajectories between animals and people, since animals are not upright, the meridians stay physically rather similar, and the lung channel and points, for example, are basically located and utilized in a very similar fashion in animals as they are in humans, even though the channel no longer flows up towards heaven in the same way. Because you cannot take an animal that walks on all four and take their arms up and say, oh, now the lung flows towards heaven. It's not really, doesn't make much sense to do that. What those physical underlying mechanisms are is subject to debate. Some people argue more in favor of blood or lymph flow effects. Others argue more in favor of nerve impulses. These two tend to gain favor amongst researchers as they can be more easily measured. Another school of thought places greater weight on the effect of acupuncture on the brain, again, something which can be measured in scans. My personal bias is towards the idea of connective tissue, or fascia. For me, a needle breaks down connective tissue. I look for congestive fascia when I needle. The micro breakdown of the tissue generates, presumably, biochemical effects that can resonate anywhere in the body, because the connective tissue wraps around everything and communicates with everything. In plastics chemistry, there is a concept of crystallinity. The more the polymers are aligned, the more light passes through the sheet. The more the molecules are just globbed on top of each other and not aligned, that is what is called amorphous, and the more opaque the plastic is. A crystal has the molecules in great alignment and therefore refracts light. In a somewhat similar process, laser beams are produced, carrying more intense energy due to their what's called coherence, the resonance of the waves, something equivalent to the alignment of the molecules. Therefore, my sense is that when the tissue is in an amorphous state, that is, the fascia is all globbed up or congested, the conductivity is low. When we break this up and align the fascial molecules, higher conductivity is facilitated. And this, of course, sounds very similar to what the ancient Chinese, when they talked about qi moving and qi being obstructed and having qi flow, producing health, and when there is stagnation, then it is because qi is not flowing. This sounds very similar to those ideas. I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily the mechanism of acupuncture. I simply do not have the biochemical or physical background to substantiate such claims. I'm only suggesting that this is the image that forms my own biases, my own way of working. So this is one of my biases. Another bias that influences my clinical thinking is that although Chinese medicine is said to be a Taoist medicine, I am definitely not a Taoist, and I do not really study Taoism. My own leanings are in the Buddhist arena and reflect a Zen, a Chan training, as well as a yogic training. I'm also biased in that I am not a sinologist, and as an acupuncturist, I lean towards a certain way of working which is rather physical. We can all come up with some wonderful ideas about meridians and points, but at the end of the day, for our profession, we need to take that theory and test it in practice. If you're working in a lab, you can test whether a point or a point combination affects, say, brainwaves, and therefore you can test theories that way. As clinicians, we generally do not do that. So we need other ways to assess whatever theories we might have, whatever ideas we have. Some do it by detecting changes in the pulse. So I have a theory, oh, this point is very good for a certain condition, and then I take the pulse on many people, and when I use that point, their pulse changes positively. And I can say, oh, this point, say REN 12, affects the pulse by giving it greater clarity or greater strength. Many people do it by waiting to see the results on the patient's symptoms, which can be relatively quick if the symptom is physical pain, but may take weeks or more to get a clear picture when the complaint is of an internal disorder, like say insomnia, infertility, some autoimmune disease, etc. So the method of, even though this is the most conclusive understanding when the patient gets better, it may take us a long time to understand that. And it may be part, especially since many people also use herbs when they use acupuncture, we may not know if a particular point has affected it or not. Of course, the only true test is based on the resultant shift in the patient's condition. But for me, in order to be able to assess on the table, I rely on palpation. When I find areas of pressure pain on the patient, I can then test possible treatment points. If they reduce the pressure pain found earlier, it means that they are having an effect on the body, on the organism. While I did not ascertain that this effect will necessarily translate to an improved condition, I have been able to get a confirmation that something is moving. Generally, the dissolution of pressure pain, discomfort that I create by pressing on the abdomen, tends to indicate an improvement in the patient's health. Again, this is because it indicates that the fascia got realigned and now it is less amorphous, more crystalline, not just at the site of the needle, but also in another location, say the abdomen, that is now being affected through that remote needle. I do not assume that I understand the map of the meridians completely, or its origins fully. In fact, I think I don't. And yet, I am still able to use that map, and I use it according to my biases. I do my best to confirm the portions of the map that I grasp, and I do that based on the relationship of reflexes and treatment points, on physiology, and at times on point names that might give us further clues. I tend not to rely very much on the standard dogmas, so I will not be someone who uses metaphors such as Shaoyang arm naturally treats Shaoyang leg as a standard dogma for me. My own map is strongly influenced by concepts that were unlikely to have been discussed in this way in the Han Dynasty. For example, I see certain tissues or parts of the body as related to immune issues. Those will include the glands behind the SCM, the neck glands, the appendix area, the lymph of the abdomen, which will be right stomach 26-27, the tissue below the scapular spine, and the tissue above the posterior iliac crest, as well as the muscle attachment to the bone below the elbow, large intestine 10-11 area. There are hormonal correlations that show in the inner thigh, just above the knee, as well as the eyes at bladder 2, the occiput, gallbladder 20 to gallbladder 12, puffiness over the sacrum, and small intestine 13, Sanjiao 15 area, the suprascapular fossa. And then there are nervous system related areas, which include the occiput, the SCM, the upper thoracic spine, the left inner border of the scapula, the coccyx, and the groin, liver 12 area. Circulatory related tissue can be found around small intestine 11, the scalenes, stomach 12 area, and the rhomboids, UB13-42 type area, which are related more to oxygenation aspect of circulation, but still circulation. So these are parts of my personal maps. The ancients did not name such areas. They did not see the human organism with the same ideas that we have of a nervous system, endocrine system, immune system, etc. Well, it would be very odd if these two methods of viewing the body, which we might label as traditional Chinese and modern Western, did not match and intersect once we peel some of the cultural layers. This is not to say that there are no unique features to each system of looking at the body, but that at the end of the day, if we're looking at the same organism, we must surely be seeing something relatively similar, even if it is expressed very differently. Because of that, I tend to translate certain Chinese characters with connotations that are influenced by my culture. For example, the character Chang means serious movement, therefore to charge or to dash. The character Tu, often translated as chimney, also means to dash and shows a dog rushing out of its cave. Both can often be related to the nervous system in point names, especially with a character Tu, where you have points with Tu on the neck, on the SCM, when the nervous system actually does show. This is not going to be universally true, but it is always a possibility that's worth considering. The ancients might not have named a nervous system in their vocabulary, but they did understand much of what the nervous system does and its effect, and in many cases, Tu or Chang points do bear a relationship to the nervous system, while in other cases, the Chang may be a reference to the blood or to the core, so it's not an absolute relationship. I did not try to produce some definitive dictionary of point names. I am merely trying to convey one way of thinking about them with the hope that others will come out with more ways, more ideas, that will enrich all of us in our clinical lives.